Elisabetta Gardini, and I give immediately the floor to Elisabetta for explaining the reason of the objection. Please.
Grazie.
Thanks, Chair. Clearly, I'm speaking on behalf of Renata Sommer, too. Unfortunately, she can't attend. She's working on other things. She's in a shadow meeting frying other fish. So you'll have to listen to me. We stand firmly behind the objection because the Commission is suggesting removing 5 important flavourings from the list of substances which was approved by the EU already. We are talking about 5 substances which are used in more than 2,000 flavourings. And we are talking about 16 different types of foods affected. I should like to underscore the following. This decision is not underpinned by the detection of any health-related risk. It's the Commission itself which explains in its rationale that this decision it's made does not tally with any health risk. This decision is to do with a number of technical and procedural issues. The 5 flavourings in question have been on the market since the 70s and have been deemed safe by the US authorities and indeed by other authoritative assessment authorities, including the Joint Expert Committee of the WHO and the UN Organization for Health and Food and Agriculture, FAO. Our objection has to do with the principle of proportionality and our commitment to better regulation, as you mentioned before under the other point, Chair. Clearly, we must see to it that European standards which are currently in force are complied with. That said, it behoves us to point out that for these 5 substances, we only note that the deadline under the procedure was not complied with. That's step 2. As I say, we're talking about only 5 substances for which the application was not made in time. We're talking about 5 substances out of 2,200. 2,200 substances for which industry provided the data. Industry has dragged its heels a little, and there were some stumbling blocks. We're not just keeping an eagle eye on what the Commission is doing. Rather, we would like them to comply with the principle of proportionality. Here, as we see it, we are facing over-implementation, cumbersome implementation of current legislation. There is no benefit for consumers, and industry is being harmed as well. The industry is going to have to bear costs. There are organisational rejigging to be done and so on and so forth. And there are a lot of SMEs involved here. Likewise in the food industry, where there are a swathe of small and medium enterprises. And given the high level of competition in the food sector around the world, I think the principle of better regulation should be guaranteed so that our companies can remain competitive, and let's hope that they can also generate new jobs given the present state of play on the labour market. Given that the right information was provided, that's the data have gone to Sanka to be conveyed thereafter to EFSA. So I would call upon the Commission to reconsider its proposed regulation. rather than following through with a decision which would have a negative impact on many players. Given that recovery is very meagre, I think this is the right way of going about things. And it's the most natural way of going about things too, given the strategy which the Commission has been pursuing for quite some time now. The Commission sees economic recovery and the creation of jobs as absolute priorities.
Grazie. The floor to Madame Melior.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chairman. Mrs. Gardini said rightly it's about 5 flavourings, chemically produced aromas which are like the natural thing. The deadline has not been infringed by just 2 months, but rather 1 year. I agree. That's a bureaucratic argument and contradicts what we've very much underlined here, better regulation. But I'm more interested in another aspect than this bureaucratic and technical reason. I'm interested in what is also feared in connection with the use of these 5 flavourings. But also we've heard about genotoxical effects, and this affects the health of consumers. Industry, the producing industry, says these substances, and you said this too, have been active in the market for a very long time, in some cases 40 years, and are considered beyond reproach by the WHO and FAO, but the EFSA thinks that there are genotoxical effects in 3 of these 5 substances. EFSA considers further studies necessary, and we must be a bit more critical. In particular, the Commission says that the WHO and the FAO share these concerns about genotoxical effects. Perhaps the Commission can help us here. I wouldn't just follow it if this effect is not yet clear, and I'd like to know what the position of EFSA is on this.
Have you something to say?
Well, yes. Well, my proposal was to give the European Commission the floor first, because we have a lot of questions, and maybe most of them are being answered by the Commission before we all table these same questions. Because I need some clarifications why the Commission took this decision. So maybe it's good to
we
ask
usually, when we object something, we in the previous occasion, we usually listen before the members and then the Commission. But if we want to have some clarification, probably we can ask to the Commission to answer to the objection made by the colleagues, and then later we can react and add additional point. And then, if you agree, we can give the floor to Mr. Verstraete, who is a member of the Commission and head of unit, and he can answer to the objection made by our colleagues, Sommer and Gardini, and then later we continue to speak and to put additional questions also on the basis of the answer coming from the Commission in the first stage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think it's indeed, as also was pointed out by some interventions, appropriate to give also some background to this draft regulation removing or withdrawing 5 flavouring substances from the Union list. In fact, some history. So the Union list was already planned back in 2000 in a 5-year evaluation programme to be established by 2005. That was the regulation adopted in 1996. The regulation 3034/2008 as regards these flavouring substances and the regulation from the European Parliament and the Council amended this deadline for the Union list to be established until 31st of December 2010. And before that time, we had only a register of flavouring substances. So the Union list of flavourings was established by Commission Regulation 872/2012 and contains some 2,500 flavourings. Amongst them, it was considered appropriate also to include 411 substances for which the risk assessment was not yet finalised and for which further scientific data were required at specified deadlines within the regulation, under which the evaluation by EFSA at the time of the adoption for which there was needed further for the allowing the evaluation by EFSA. And it was clear, mentioned in the regulation, that this was the condition that the necessary information has to be provided by the deadline. If the necessary information was not provided by the time requested, the flavouring substances in question would be withdrawn from the Union list. So, in fact, as regards the safety, because it was also mentioned that this is a pure bureaucratic measure, I would not call it like this, because there are, as regards these substances, EFSA had some concerns as regards the safety of these substances. It was also the reason why there was indeed, back in 2011, they were put under condition because there were further studies required. And, as I said, we had set several deadlines. And for these 5 substances now currently under consideration, we have had established the latest deadline, be it the 31st of December 2013. So, by the 31st December 2013, we had not, for these 5 substances, not any new scientific substance studies submitted by the food business operators. After the expiry of the deadline, of course, studies have been submitted 1 year, some of them in November and others in January of this year. And for one substance, even no studies have yet been submitted. But indeed, there is foreseen in regulation that after the expiry of the deadline, indeed, new applications on these 5 substances could be submitted under the current system, because we have changes in 2010 the system, that under the common authorization procedure. So as I already said, for one of these substances there are no studies submitted. For the other substances, we had studies submitted 1 year after the deadline. I also pointed out that we in the Commission started then the procedure for withdrawing the substances after having informed the stakeholders in March 2014. And indeed, we first discussed the measure with the Member States in the working groups. Once this was finalised, we also submitted the draft proposal to SPS under the obligations under the SPS agreement for 60 days comment. And it was already after that the measure was already submitted to WTO that indeed these studies were received. Also, I would like to indicate that we had also some views as regards possible disruption of the market, and it's for that we have foreseen also in this withdrawal of these 5 substances a 9-month transition period. So indeed, even after the adoption of the measure, the foods containing these flavours can remain on the market can be placed on the market until 9 months after the entry into force, and there is also then time for the food business operators to eventually reformulate their products if needed. as I said, these requirements of the scientific data, they are not purely bureaucratic. They are there because there were safety concerns. And in order to keep indeed a high level of protection of the safety of consumers, and which should not be deteriorated by the unwillingness of operators to submit the necessary data in time. And so, as I said, also these studies have now been submitted, but it is unsure to which extent they will be able to lift the concerns, the safety concerns which are currently on these substances, as they have not yet been evaluated by EFSA. As I said, the Commission considers this measure proportionate, as moreover the stakeholders or the industry had the possibility to avoid any disruption of the market by providing the missing data in time, or, which they have not done, or to submit already a new application under the common authorization procedure, because they could have done it already 4 or 5 months ago, because the studies are there, but which they have also not yet done. Another point is that we have to consider that there were 411 substances back in 2012 which were under the same situation, that they had indeed additional studies to be submitted. For 406, the studies were submitted. For 5 of them, not. So for 406, the relevant industries have done the effort to indeed provide the necessary studies, and so consequently no withdrawal is indeed at this stage foreseen for these substances, and that would be indeed discriminatory for those industries which have not done the efforts to provide the studies, that they would also be able to remain their products on the market, while indeed the other industries have done the efforts to provide the missing studies. And indeed, I think the measure is not only proportionate, it is also non-discriminatory. Thank you.
Okay. Madame Hawken.
Thank you. Just to say I'm happy for the reply from the Commission. I think better regulation, if that means that we can just floor all regulation, just saying, well, no data, no markets shouldn't apply any longer, and if some industry can use the buzzword of SME, then they are always safe, and if they can even say, well, this has been on the market. DDT has been on the market for years. Just to mention something which has been on the market for years without true investigation. I really appreciate that the Commission is taking itself, and that means taking the EU legislation serious, and it's not mixing this strange word of better regulation, which up till now only had been translated into no regulation, as far as I could hear, at least less regulation. But I'm very happy that you still think that this Parliament and the Council and the Commission together should make true legislation. Of course, we have to fulfill it, and it's very, very liberal in the way it's done. So that if these industries really wanted to do their work, they could, of course, have done it. And I would even add, one of the things which really annoyed me when I was elected to this Parliament 10 years ago, after being 20 years in the Danish Parliament, that is that time is never time. You accumulate the delay. Everybody is delayed, which means everybody is coming too late, and then we just accumulate. And if it's not to you, Giovanni, I know you are almost always in time, but it happens so many times that we can see what, if we just say, oh, don't care about the time, don't care about that and that, we can just continue. I think that I really appreciate that we got this resolution proposal at the table, because it makes it clear that this here should be done properly. And then I won't go into, because I have no clue to do that, to say if there are safety risks. But as far as I could see in the papers, yes, there are safety risks. But this is just only to fulfill the possibilities everybody have. And you cannot hide it behind saying, I'm just a little business, I don't... Come on, and how small should small business be not to be taken serious? Very often I've seen this SME, and then you look behind, And you see big business just not wanting to provide data, because that's very often the case too. So thank you very much, and I hope that we will keep up some of the good spirit in this Commission and not putting everything aside, calling it a bad regulation if we have any regulation at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gemelli.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm speaking on behalf of Frédéric Ries, our shadow, who couldn't be here. I must admit that I'm struggling with this file, and therefore I do have a few additional questions to the Commission. First of all, did I understood it well that there are safety risks with these 5 substances that will not be allowed on the market anymore? But if so, they're not so risky that still a 9-month transition period seems to be sufficiently safe. So maybe you can explain a little bit better about the risks, and apparently why are the risks well, high enough to not allow the substances on the market in the future, but it's safe enough to leave them on the market for the coming 9 months? That is my first question. Second question is, there was quite some time, and the deadline was December 2013, so there was quite some time for producers of these substances to come forward with the necessary information, the studies. What is the reason for them not doing so? Are we talking about very small companies that were not aware or were not able or whatever? Maybe you can go into that as well. And my final question is, you mentioned that this was discussed in the working group of Council. Does that mean that the Council agreed with not allowing these substances on the market anymore? Was there any debate within Council about this? Was there a vote, or was there by unanimity a decision to follow the Commission on this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madame Grostet.
En écoutant les explications des uns et des autres,
Listening to the explanations of various people, it appears less and less clear. I'm a bit surprised. I don't agree with some of my colleagues. The information that I have is that there are companies who are not able to give all the information in the deadlines required. Contrary to what some have said, in southern Europe, there are a lot of small companies, small SMEs, working on the question of aromatic and perfuming flavourings. And they're more solid than you'd think. That's wrong. In my area, there are a lot of SMEs working on the subject. So my questions are, if we're told there's a substance for which no studies have been presented, for the others they've been presented but late, and EFSA, if I've understood correctly, EFSA hasn't done its evaluation. So if that's the case, let's wait until we have all the information before taking a decision straight away, which is an economic decision, which can have a large impact on SMEs. There are two problems. Either there has been a delay, which can be explained, and if that's the case, if we want to have better legislation, we have to take into account the difficulties of SMEs. In this Parliament, for years, I've been hearing that everyone says we have to help and support SMEs, etc. Either it's a problem of delay, wait for EFSA's findings. If EFSA says that after the studies that such and such a flavouring poses a safety problem, then there's a problem. But at the moment, we don't have those elements as of today. So we should wait and not penalise people. I'd like to support my colleagues and Mrs. Gardini, who spoke just now. I have lots of doubts. We can't, with a lack of transparency, with contradictory information, how can we take a position? For industry and SMEs, we have completely different information. So we have to have a fair and balanced opinion and as objective as possible. That's what I want. So I ask we have some time for reflection before we take any decisions.
Thank you very much. Ms. De La Haye.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think we need to draw the debate out because I think Françoise Grossetête really covered most of what I had wanted to say. But I would draw colleagues' attention to the persistently negative image that we're sending out now to economic actors and citizens if we can't regulate this problem in a decent way. If EFSA is saying that these 5 substances are toxic, or if they're not, but let's just give a bit of way on this administrative and bureaucratic approach. I mean, I understand the Commission because they're really doing what they're meant to do here.
Thank you very much. During the debate, we have received our question from the Commission, and I give immediately the floor to the Commission for answering.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want also to highlight that the deadlines for submitting the studies as established by the Commission Regulation 872/2012 have been established after consultation of the flavourings industry. And it was also for that reason that indeed for the substances we have submitted or provided for different deadlines also following the discussions with the flavouring industry and to allow indeed the industry to provide the studies in time. I also want to highlight that there were back in 2012 in the list 411 substances in the same situation where or they were still under evaluation or there had to be studies submitted, and only for these 5 there were not studies submitted. So it is not that it was an unreasonable requirement because the requirement was fulfilled for 406 other substances and only not for these 5. As regards the risks, well, maybe I have not well expressed myself. It's in fact, we don't have yet the evidence that there is an absence of risk. So for the time being, we have no evidence that they are risky, but we have also no evidence that there is no risk. So there's therefore that these additional studies are necessary to, after assessment, to see if these flavours do pose a risk, and would have them anyway to be withdrawn. It is not because the studies are submitted that they can remain on, or if indeed, based on these studies, that EFSA can conclude that these flavours are safe. So for the time being, when I say there are safety concerns, it's because we are not sure if they are safe, but we are also not, we have no evidence yet if that they are at risk. As regards the discussions, because in the standing committee we have discussed that, and the measure was voted in favour with nearly unanimity, so with 27 member states in favour and 1 member state abstaining. In fact, to be indeed, it is also published on our website for reasons outlined of proportionality as regards the measure. So, but a very large majority of the member states were in favour, and as this is a regulatory measure under regulatory procedure under scrutiny, the Council, it's not yet, but next week, it is an A point, will decide not to oppose this regulation. So, in fact, also, as I already mentioned, my comment as regards the discrimination, because we have had these studies for many other substances in time, for 406. It's only for these 5 that we had not the necessary or the required studies. It is also the credibility of the European Union system. When we say we set a union list where there are products which are safe, we here also the European Parliament, together with the Council, have established a procedure under which certain products can remain on the list, under which the procedure under which products have to be withdrawn from the list, or under which conditions they can be authorized. And so, in order to, and I must say, I would say as informally, that when we had the first meeting with the industry, informing them that the deadline had expired and that the studies were not submitted, the comment from a stakeholder was, we did not think that the Commission was taking this deadline so seriously. But of course the deadlines are laid down in community legislation, in union legislation, and so it is not more than normal that we take them serious. So it is indeed also the credibility. We have set up a system. There were already sufficient transitional times foreseen. As I said, this goes back from 2000, where we indeed then also why the regulation of the Parliament and Council, the deadline of 2005 for this union list was postponed up to 2010. Then again, for 411 substances, we foresaw a transitional period where studies could be submitted. And at a certain moment, you have to say, well, we have to stop with providing transitional periods. We have now been already flexible enough, and in order to maintain the credibility of the system, at a certain moment we have to decide the conditions are not fulfilled and these products have to be removed from the union list. But removal does not mean that they are removed forever. The industry has always the possibility to submit a new application, and that will be assessed by EFSA, and if it is found safe, they will be reauthorized and to be placed on the union list. And they had already the possibility to do that for several months, but for the time being, no new application has been submitted. And so, why can we not wait until EFSA has now assessed these studies? Well, the procedure is clear. It was only until the 31st of December 2012 that these studies could be submitted and be assessed under the former authorization procedure. Since 2012, we have now a new authorization procedure, a common authorization procedure, which has been established by Regulation 3031, 2008, and indeed, they have to follow the new rules for application and assessment by EFSA. And so it is not that you can now still say 1 year after the deadline, well, we still, for these substances, will apply the old system and ask EFSA to look into it. This would also be against the union legislation, and therefore, I think, to maintain the credibility of the authorization system and to ensure the safety of the products which are on the market, and to keep, indeed, the image of the products which are safe and which are on the market, indeed, it's appropriate that we, indeed, apply the union legislation correctly. And as I said, it is proportionate, as we have already foreseen, much transitional periods in the past. As I said, we started the discussion already back in 2000. And the deadlines were agreed and consulted with the industry before they were established. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I think that, I don't know if Elisabetta want to conclude to add something as objector to the proposal?
Sì, grazie, molto breve.
Thanks, I'll keep it short. I would just reiterate that I don't know about this company. I've not been able to meet its representatives. But since I come from a country where SMEs are often represented also by many micro-enterprises, I would call upon the Commission to check carefully whether this is not one of those instances where a micro-enterprise is facing tremendous difficulties keeping its head afloat, given this sea of legislation which is speaking a completely different language to the enterprise. We're talking about enterprises with insufficient staff or insufficient skills to read half a page worth of English. As I see it, it's really up to Europe to assist companies to steer their way through these changes, which have been ongoing for quite some time, for large companies at least. But small and micro enterprises are still in the teething stages compared to these large companies. And as mentioned, only 5 out of about 2,500 applicants managed not to respect the deadline. This means that 99.99% of companies are respecting